Fluent Fables. Learn English with story.
Part 1. Establishment and Doubt. The air in the apartment was thick with the stale aroma of neglect and the faint, persistent chill of old stone. Arthur, a man whose face carried the perpetually furrowed brow of a meticulous translator and the haunted look of recent grief, stood amidst a scattering of packed boxes, his gaze fixed on the shared wall of Unit B. He had rented this loft in the aging Blackwood Manor precisely for its isolation. He needed to bite the bullet and confront the debilitating quietude of his new reality. A reality stripped of the brilliant, chaotic energy his late wife, Ilara, had perpetually generated. The solitude was meant to be restorative, a penance perhaps. Ilara's death, a sudden, tragic car accident 6 months prior, had been devastating, but the unspoken truth Arthur carried was heavier. The shame of the acrimonious argument they'd had moments before she'd driven off. That bitter memory was a corrosive force, and his latest commission, a dense philosophical treatise on existential nihilism, demanded absolute solitude. The building, according to the cryptic Mrs. Nelson, offered it in abundance. He had sought the silence of a tomb, and it seemed the manor was eager to provide it. The silence, however, had an unnerving resonance. It started subtly, a vibration more felt than heard, a low, prolonged groan that seemed to emanate not from the floorboards, but from the very structure of the building, a sound that made his stomach clench with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. He initially dismissed it as the typical acoustics of a structure whose foundation had witnessed 3 generations of tenants. Fatigue, he rationalized, was turning ambient noise into ominous portents. He'd meticulously recorded the sound in his mental journal, then forced himself back to the daunting pile of Greek translations, his mind struggling to reconcile the lucid demands of the text with the nascent anxieties of his environment.
But then came the undeniable evidence, an abrupt rupture of his self-delusion. 2 days later, around midnight, a distinct rhythmic tapping began on the shared wall. Not aggressive, but methodical. It sounded like someone placing a heavy object down, dragging it a foot, and then placing it down again. It suggested deliberation, a calculated disruption. Arthur felt a cold spike of adrenaline. He was specifically told that Unit B had been vacant for years. Its last elderly tenant had passed away, and the unit was awaiting probate. Yet this noise was palpably present, its persistence beginning to get under his skin. He pressed his ear against the cold, peeling plaster. The sound ceased instantly, replaced by a vacuum of silence that was more aggressive than the noise itself. He retreated, pacing his apartment. He noted the time, 12:17 a.m. This wasn't the sound of an old building settling. This was the work of an intentional presence. The sudden silence stretched, unsettling and pervasive. He attempted to call Mrs. Nelson, the building manager who occupied the ground floor, but only reached a crackling voicemail that offered no solace. The meticulous part of his mind, the one that dealt in concrete syntax and provable facts, was battling the burgeoning terror that was beginning to blossom in his chest, suggesting that the very walls of Blackwood Manor held a secret he was not equipped to uncover. He felt the first tremors of genuine fear, a fear that had nothing to do with Ilara's ghost, but with the cold, hard certainty of a lie.
Part 2. Paranoia and scrutiny. The strange occurrences escalated with a terrifying logic designed, it seemed, to chip away at Arthur's already precarious mental state. The dragging sounds were replaced by a faint, distant melody, a scratchy, melancholic recording of a 1940s jazz standard played at a barely perceptible volume. It was the kind of music his wife, Ilara, had adored. A cruel, precise detail that weaponized his grief. The connection, however faint, sent a shiver of true dread through him, making him question the very nature of his move and the solace he sought. The noises were no longer ambient. They were targeted.
One morning, he woke to find a fine, metallic dust, like microscopic filings, scattered across the floorboards near the shared wall. It was a tangible, undeniable residue of activity. He swept it up, his hands shaking, placing it in an envelope, a silent, futile protest against the invisibility of his tormentor. He finally cornered Mrs. Nelson in the communal laundry room, a space as dilapidated as the rest of the building. She was a woman of sharp angles and suspicious eyes, perpetually clad in a shapeless, faded cardigan. The scent of mothballs and bleach clung to her like an aura. "Mrs. Nelson," Arthur began, his tone a carefully modulated blend of politeness and urgency, "I need to ask about the occupant in Unit B. I've been hearing significant noise. I've found evidence of activity."
She stopped folding a towel, her movement arrested. Her look of feigned confusion was almost theatrical. "Unit B, Mr. Arthur? I assure you that unit has been empty for well over 5 years. It is sealed. The owner is an elderly gentleman in Toronto. Perhaps the sounds are the usual settling of the old pipes. This building is a bit of a relic, you know." Her voice was dismissive, carrying an inflection of controlled contempt. "It's not pipes," Arthur insisted, his voice rising slightly. "It's a definite rhythmic noise. Last night, music. A record player, I think. Could you confirm the last time the unit was inspected? Show me the maintenance log, please."
Mrs. Nelson, however, seemed determined to maintain her narrative. She shrugged, a gesture of indifference that grated on Arthur's nerves. She looked at him with an oddly knowing pity, suggesting that his grief-induced fatigue was causing him delusions. She claimed she would check with the landlord, but clearly had no intention of doing so. When pressed for any details about the last tenant, she just drew a blank and quickly changed the subject to the absurd price of electricity, clearly unwilling to engage with the reality he presented. It was a masterful performance of obfuscation.
Feeling a burning frustration at her calculated evasiveness, Arthur took matters into his own hands. He spent a sleepless night observing the external facade of the building. Unit B's single window, facing the alley, was shrouded in a heavy, moth-eaten curtain. It seemed utterly impenetrable, a black square in the brickwork. Yet as he watched through the rain-streaked glass of his own window, he swore he saw a subtle, momentary flicker, the briefest outline of a shadow, a tall silhouette that instantly vanished. A curtain moving in a draft? Or a figure observing him observing it? He couldn't discern.
His mind, usually a sanctuary of logical deduction, was beginning to fragment. The precise details of the noise, the cold denial of Mrs. Nelson, the fleeting shadow, all of it merged into a single, amorphous threat. The ambiguity was the horror. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was out of his depth, navigating a situation that defied his carefully constructed world of rational thought. The meticulous translator had become a desperate investigator, his professional life collapsing under the weight of his personal terror. The silence had betrayed him. Part 3, the discovery and the descent, the need for definitive proof became an obsession, overriding self-preservation. Arthur bypassed the formal entryway and sought the fire escape, a rickety contraption of rusted iron that scaled the back of the manor. The climb was precarious,
his fear of heights eclipsed by the burning curiosity to see Unit B up close. The risk of a fall was nothing compared to the risk of continued ignorance. The window of Unit B was indeed sealed shut, the glass opaque with accumulated grime. He pressed his face against it, shielding his eyes from the weak light. He could see nothing but a vague interior darkness. He moved to the door, a heavy, solid wood barrier with a massive deadbolt. The wood itself smelled of ancient dust and a faint, sickly sweet scent that his mind struggled to categorize. A floral air freshener? Or something decaying? The scent was another lie the building was telling him.
He located a small metal spatula in his pocket, a precision tool for opening his antique typewriter case, and began carefully jimmying the lock. The action was reckless, desperate. After 10 minutes of focused, meticulous work, the lock clicked with a chilling finality. He pushed the door inward. A wave of cool, inert air washed over him, a smell of mildew and confinement. The apartment was not just empty, it was a museum of abandonment. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of alley light. The furniture was draped in ghostly white sheets, exactly as Mrs. Nelson had described, a stark, undeniable, empty shell. Arthur felt a sudden rush of self-loathing. He had allowed a few creaks and a fleeting shadow to drive him to the edge of an illegal and utterly pointless break-in. He was hallucinating, the grief finally manifesting in full-blown paranoia. He turned to leave, his shame overwhelming, but something stopped him. The floor plan of these manor apartments was always identical: living room, kitchen, bedroom, and a small study at the very end of the hall.
He walked the short hallway. The kitchen was an archaeological site of neglect. The bathroom was worse. But when he reached the door to the small study, he saw the difference. This door was closed, and beneath it, a sliver of light glowed. A faint, almost imperceptible humming sound emanated from behind it. Arthur's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline. He slowly pushed the door open, the old hinges groaning in protest. The room was immaculate. It was not a dusty, abandoned space, but a fully functional, modern study. A sleek, minimalist desk faced the wall. On the desk, illuminated by a small, focused lamp, lay a single, open notebook. The air in this room was dry, conditioned, and subtly metallic. His eyes immediately focused on the handwriting. It was a precise, sloping script, instantly recognizable. It was his own handwriting. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow, stealing his breath and sending a shockwave of terror through his limbs. He stumbled forward, his hands trembling as he grabbed the notebook. The entries were a meticulous chronicle of the past 2 weeks, detailed accounts of his movements. Arthur meticulously pondered the significance of the sound. He went to the communal laundry and spoke to Mrs. Nelson. He bought a particular brand of stale coffee from the corner store. Every thought, every action was recorded with an intimacy that was terrifyingly absolute, demonstrating an omniscience that defied any natural explanation. Then he reached the final entry, dated today. It detailed his preparations for the break-in, written in the immediate present tense. He is checking the fire escape now. He will use the metal spatula. He will be in the hall in exactly 15 seconds.
Part 4. Climax and Revelation.
Arthur staggered back, dropping the notebook onto the desk with a heavy thud. The room, the desk, the light, they all swam before his eyes. The last entry was a prophecy that had just been fulfilled. The notebook wasn't documenting his past, it was writing his immediate future.
The thought that a doppelganger, a malicious entity, was living next door, recording his life as a script, sent him into a spiral of utter disorientation and genuine madness. If he hadn't opened that door, he would never have known the horrifying truth that his entire existence was merely documented.
He frantically flipped the final page. There was one line, written in bold, frantic strokes, the ink still wet. He knows now. The entire fragile world we built is hanging by a thread. A sound behind him, a soft, wet sigh. He spun around. The door to the study, which he thought he had left ajar, was now completely shut. And standing in the frame of the interior doorway, silhouetted against the dark hallway, was a figure. It was a tall silhouette, exactly the one he had seen fleetingly behind the curtains. But as the figure stepped forward, Arthur felt a wave of crushing despair. It was himself, a mirror image, dressed in the exact same clothes, holding the same expression of wide-eyed terror. But the other Arthur had a crucial difference. His eyes were full of a cold, unsettling sanity, a sanity that felt utterly terrifying. The doppelganger raised a hand identical to his own, down to the small scar on the index finger. He spoke. His voice, a low, level echo of Arthur's own internal monologue, devoid of any genuine emotion.
The truth is never the other unit, Arthur. It's always the man in the mirror. You came here to escape Ilara, to escape the shame of what you said to her. You fabricated the occupant to give your impending breakdown a physical target. Unit B has always been empty. It's a stage set by your own mind. Arthur reacted with a primal, desperate fury, lunging for the exit, stumbling back toward the unlocked door to the exterior hall. He had to get out. He had to prove he was real, a victim, not a perpetrator. He pushed through the dust-covered living room, his every move mirrored by the relentless double who pursued him in silence. He slammed the door shut and scrambled back across the hall into the safety of his own Unit A, locking and barring the door with trembling hands. He leaned his back against the solid wood, gasping for breath, the fear a bitter metallic taste on his tongue. He had survived the encounter. He looked around his own apartment. The scattered boxes, the heavy translations, the precise, lonely routine he had constructed. It was all there. He was safe. Then, a sudden realization hit him, a twist of the knife that went far deeper than the fear of a neighbor. He had just unlocked and entered Unit B. He had touched the walls, felt the door, seen the dust, and read the notebook. Yet his apartment was filled with the distinct, metallic, acrid smell of the old building's air, the smell of the hallway outside Unit A. The door he was leaning on felt cold, dense, and solid. He looked at the key rack by the door. His spare key to Unit B was still hanging there, exactly where he had left it. He had never taken it. The final piece of the terrifying puzzle clicked into place, destroying the last vestiges of his composure. The truth was not that a doppelganger was in Unit B. The truth was that he was the unreliable narrator. The break-in, the notebook, the other Arthur, it was all a fully realized delusion, a meticulous projection of his shattered psyche. He had just lived the entire confrontation entirely in his head, confined to the stark reality of his apartment. Every sound, every shadow had been sourced from the deep, corrosive guilt festering within him. From the quiet side of the shared wall, a faint, rhythmic tapping began again, a sound that was now undeniably coming from within his own room. Arthur slid down the door, folding his arms tightly around his knees, staring into the dark corner of his room, finally understanding that the occupant had never been next door. The unseen occupant was him.
The man in the apartment had lost not only his wife, but his own mind. He was home and he was alone, and the sounds would never stop. He wept, a dry, shuddering sound, the sound of a man who finally understands his own profound, incurable solitude. Advanced English learning. 1. To bite the bullet, meaning to force yourself to do something difficult or unpleasant that you have been avoiding. It implies facing a painful situation with courage. Example: Arthur needed to bite the bullet and confront his grief by starting a new, isolated life. 2. To get under one's skin, meaning to annoy, irritate, or deeply bother someone, often over a long period. Example: the persistent, strange noises began to get under Arthur's skin, driving his paranoia. 3. To draw a blank. To be unable to find an answer, remember a name, or recall a piece of information. Example: when Arthur asked Mrs. Nelson about the maintenance logs, she simply drew a blank, either genuinely or strategically. 4. To feel or be out of one's depth. To be in a situation that is too difficult, complicated, or challenging for one to handle. Example: Arthur realized he was out of his depth when he decided to break into Unit B, stepping beyond the bounds of rational investigation. 5. To be hanging by a thread. To be in a very precarious, dangerous, or unstable situation. To be very close to failure or disaster. Example: the last line of the notebook suggested that Arthur's entire fragile reality was hanging by a thread. And that, advanced learners, is where Arthur's descent into paranoia, or perhaps his acceptance of a terrifying truth, ends. The power of this psychological thriller lies not just in the plot twist, but in the sophisticated language used to describe Arthur's fragmenting reality and internal monologue. We explored C1, C2 vocabulary that painted fear with nuance, from foreboding to acrid. If you found yourself deeply immersed in Arthur's mind and easily followed the complex sentence structures, you are operating at a true advanced level. Give yourself credit for that. Now, let's make sure you don't miss our next deep dive. If you want more high-level English content that challenges your vocabulary and keeps you on the edge of your seat, there are 2 crucial steps. First, hit that subscribe button right now. And don't forget to tap the bell icon so you get notified the moment we upload a new advanced story. Second, tell me in the comments below, what was the biggest clue that Arthur was the unreliable narrator? Let's discuss your favorite advanced idioms from the story. Ready for your next linguistic challenge? Click on the video now appearing on your screen. See you there!